They were returning to Alba on the same night as they had left, All Saints' Day. That was the next day. Samhain, that day, would come and go, in a faithful marking of harvest offered to the dead, silent dinner, and doors locked and double-locked. Osrith made her way over to the stables that night. After bidding a farewell to the children, she had grown fond of them, especially little Neil and the capable, forthright Mary, and suspected she may have to leave without notice when they crossed the sea to restore Domhnall to the thrones of the Gaeos and the Picts, to Cobtin Ysanid Mac Alpin's line, to be the first king of all Alba. She had gone that evening to the stables, and was grateful that no fuss had been made of her return. Tagd had taken her sword to sharpen, though it had not needed much to put an edge back on it, for it had returned from Muir as if the Sai had been responsible for its polishing. Fergus had been packed off to collect food for them all, as they are in silence sitting in the straw of the warm stables, save the quiet huffing of the horses, and though Osrith hoped it wasn't the case, it seemed like there was extra meat than usual on her platter. Danes, Domhnall had said, confirming the ministerial letters, 2 brothers Eric and Siegfried, had incurred into Strathclyde. Poor inhabitants had fled and set up primitive traps. It had not slowed down the brothers, and they had incurred into Glashk and across to Stirling, raiding as they went. Eochaid has done nothing to check this, Domhnall told his men. We will win support if we can repel these Danes. Now is the best time to attack, though winter is upon us. They will never expect us to be upon them after Samhain. Later, one sail had been drunk and the men had listed off to sleep. Domhnall took Osrith aside, to the outbuilding where he sometimes slept, so they were quite alone. You may stay, Osrith, Domhnall said, raising an arm as if to clap her on the shoulder, but then stopped, as if conscious of his sickle touch. Muir has a place for you here. Osrith's eyes widened. Oh, no, my lord. She protested. I would return to Alba. I would be at your side. Have I shamed you such that you do not want me? And, she could only gain wealth to get to Wessex by sharing silver as spoils of war, preferably that of the Danish brothers. Shamed? Domhnall echoed. You have not shamed me. Dear girl, you have borne this braver than any man I know. He looked into her eyes, as she turned away, and Hev raised his hand to tilt her chin back for him to look at her. I would see you safe. I will never marry, Osrith protested. Definitely. Osrith, I want you by my side. You are an outstanding warrior, far better than many men. But, there are dangers in Alba. How can there be dangers with you as my king? Osrith asked, quietly. She felt her heart sink. He was trying to release her from his service, of that she was sure. Domhnall was noble, valiant and, above all, monstrously ambitious. He would not chance his position as king, and she had shown, through her sex, that she was more liability to him than an asset. Then, he did something she did not expect. Raising her left arm, he drew his palm to his mouth, pressing his lips to it. Then, just as suddenly, Domhnall stepped away, dropping her hand as if it were ice. Osrith stepped towards him, kissing him on the mouth. He pushed her away, hands on her shoulders. She would beg, if necessary. Domhnall took her hands. Osrith, I would show you the greatest love that a man would give to you, and I am showing it. You are a child still, choose a husband from the warriors and I will arrange it. Choose Domhnall, now he has decided to renounce his father's throne and come with us. Osrith shuddered. Domhnall as a husband? He was more disagreeable than Constantine. Even if he had rescued her, she didn't wholly trust him. Lord King. It can never be, Osrith. He looked away, as if his will was different than his words. I'd take a wife back with me. If you marry me, you could continue to be with Ira, Osrith suggested, quietly. She had been about to say Finolai and her mind wandered where he was. Now he had escaped and was free, and she hoped, maybe the warrior, her best friend, had made his way back to Alba to wait for Domhnall. Please do not let him be a wandering spirit tonight, she added, silently. And I could continue to be a soldier. And what about a dynasty ... children? Asked Domhnall. We could have children, she insisted. But Domhnall pushed her away. You are nothing, no one. I am, Edra of Bibbenberg, Osrith he was about to say, and if they married, he could take the throne of Bibbenberg, and all lands to the Roman wall, as was his grandfather's ambition. But, before she could say anything, Domhnall put a hand to her mouth. When she had fallen silent, he dropped it. "I love you, Domhnall MacCaustin," Osrith declared. "Not the love of a man and a woman, but the love of a warrior and lord." She knelt, on both knees, on the straw in the dim lantern light. Domhnall knelt too. "You are?" He took her hair in his hand. It was growing back. "You could be content with one of my men if not Domhnall? Fergus? Tact?" Osrith closed her eyes, as they knelt together, picturing both. Fergus, strong and broad, a thick head of hair, dark russet red, stoic, reliable, trustworthy. Tagged, tall, fair-haired and strong, like a branch of willow, soulful, strung with faith and belief. They had enacted a handfast at Tara, after all. "I just want to be your warrior, Lord. I will fight, Lord Domhnall." "You will fight," he confirmed. "I need the best around me this day." And then he took Osrith in his arms, kissing her deeply, before leaning past her face, whispering in her ear, "You would be in great danger if I were to take you for a wife, no matter who you were," and... A noise outside, rattling, banging. The candles guttered in the lanterns and went out. The sigh. It was Samhain, after all, Osrith knew. She got to her feet, hand on her sword. Domhnall put his hand on hers, to stay her unsheathing of it. "Stay still. Stay here," he instructed, striding to the door, which banged open just before he reached it. The noises hammered through the stables, like horses, huge horses, galloping, followed by a noise, like a keening, the sound the Irian women made when Kingd was buried, at Ardmarka. Osrith stood, listening as the stables were ransacked. Hammerings and bangs, a wibbedant bikeening. What was it? "They seek someone," Domhnall said, striding over to her. "The Uineal?" The sigh. "Why? Though Osrith. Whether it is the Uineal or the sigh, they will not find us. And tomorrow, we go back to Alba, to fight for my throne." Domhnall explained. "But, if it is not the sigh?" Osrith protested, then she grumbled. The horror of what she had suffered, discrete images, swam in pieces through her mind. "The door is barred," Domhnall said, pulling her close to him. Osrith could feel his heart beating through his jerkin. "Will remain awake. Nothing can get to you if I am here, Osrith Lackland." He sat down in the straw, leaning back against the stall, grey eyes like his father willing her to sit by him. Behind them, a mare snorted in her sleep at the movement of the oak panels as Domhnall raised his arm, inviting her close. That night Osrith slept in the arms of a king. In the morning, before the sun had risen, she was riding next to two on the shore of the Foyle, where once she hunted squid for their ink and piggins for potions. It was not yet dawn. Boats, pre-arranged to take advantage of the high tide of the loch, were rowing in, their hazy outlines picked put by the pre-dawn light. They passed the rock next to where she had been tied by 9 fingers, around which the coracles were piloting. Osrith could feel her chest swelling with brine as the waters engulfed her, and she relived again the cold panic of helplessness, and death approaching with every incoming wave. It was only when Constantine took her bridle, that she was aware their journey was over, and she was gripping the reins tightly. She was shaking and, reluctantly, allowed the prince to help her down. 6 boarded 2 coracles belonging to the monks of Ratlin, Osrith and Constantine with tagged in one, Domhnall with Domhnall and Fergus in another. Should one boat sink, the other held a man who could be king. Osrith held the side of the boat, fighting visions of her drowning as they began their risky journey across the northern sea and to Iona, where Domhnall, with his cousins Constantine and the dispossessed Domhnall by his side, would fight to regain the throne of his family, Alpin. 88,888,888. St. John's Eve, 904. "Tell me the story of the Princess Momma," begged Edra, holding up her hand to Osrith. She smiled down to the child, who was lying, eyes lighted up, mind filled with sounds of the far-off festivities. Osrith eased herself onto the silk coverlet as the flame-colored hair of her adopted daughter spilled out onto the pillow, and she stroked Edra's temples with the backs of her fingers, a trick which soothed the girl. "There was once a princess," she began. "I love this story." Edra opened her bright blue eyes and looked at her mother. "I know, beautiful," Osrith sighed, trying to keep her voice low. "And she lived in a castle by a wild sea." Soon, the rhythm of the story began its soporific result, yet Edra was resisting sleep. The hero of the story, the priest, guarded the crypt in which the bones of all the saints of the realm lay. His was a studious job, yet he was as brave as any warrior, held a sword like any warrior and fought. Vicious pirates often came to raid, but could not breach the walls of Tby fortress, and "The Norse?" asked a tiny voice. "Danes," Osrith confirmed, withdrawing her hand. Maybe her touch was disturbing Edra. "What are Danes?" "Like the Norse." Osrith sighed, listening to the distant shouts and laughter of people enjoying themselves far away. The heathen would be there, Allah would be there, plying her knowledge, good knowledge, which worked, but was against the law. Osrith looked across to Edra, whose eyes were determinedly open. "Sit up, my darling," Osrith said, moving her pillow up the polished oak bed frame. Nothing had ever been too good for Edra, in Constantine's eyes, and now Mary had died. He took little interest in his children, besides Seluk and Indalf, and Domhnall's eldest, Malcolm, all fighting-age boys. "You are a Dane," Osrith told her, hesitatingly. "Your grandfather ruled vast areas of land which once belonged to my family." "He was a great warrior." Osrith paused, considering her choice of words. "He was just and true. He took pity on the weak and was fair-minded. Your mother was his only daughter." "And I am your only daughter," Edru pressed, her cornflower blue eyes twinkling at Osrith. "You have often said it." "I have often said it to Constantine," Osrith thought, in Gaelish, "as he reminds me of my requirement of espionage for your keep. And you understand me, as well as the English I speak to you, and the Cymric if the servants and the Danish the two slaves speak to you, though they are Norse, and it is the same tongue. You truly are a wonder." "I am your mother?" "Yes," Osrith nodded. "But the lady who carried you, in her body as you grew, was a brave, fierce Danish lady with hair the color of fire. Like mine." She held out her hair in her fingers. "And Constantine is my father, he said so." And then Edra threw herself at Osrith fiercely, as if she never wanted to let her go, before pulling her down next to her and demanding the story of the cousins' war, Ecgfrith the Angle and Bridi the Pict of Dunnichten, saying that oft-repeated epithet that, "No Angle or Saxon will ever take Alba, will they, Mama?" It was too soon for her to understand, Osrith told herself, as Edra settled, finally, into a slow, rhythmical sighing. She was too young to know. But time had passed too quickly. She should write to Bukka. The last she heard of his whereabouts, the elderly priest, Edra's father, had been ministering in Wessex and travelling from parish to parish following Alfred's death and Elswith's expulsion of him from the palace. She did not want the husband of a Dane, even the good and true man Bukka was, to be in any way involved in decisions. No, Osrith knew. From a letter Bukka had written to a monk he knew at Culdys, Ethelelm had taken his place. Ethelelm, whose daughter had usurped Edward's first wife, for the interest of the money he could bring to Wessex's crown. And despite all of that, Osrith had gleaned, from Bukka's missive, not one phrase, not one sentence spoke of anger or resentment, just pity and regret for the future of Wessex, whose political decisions were now being made not by wisdom, but money. He should be made into a saint, Osrith thought. He didn't make rain stop, or start, or bring an abbess back to life, or repel a wind or anything that makes men saints. But then, he never was truly in the favour of Alfred, especially after her brother appeared in Wessex. Deeds, however minor, needed to be recorded, but what of a priest who had calmed a mad Danish woman, out of her wits for the abuse she had suffered at the hands of other Danes? What of the peace he had bestowed on Alfred's greatest warrior? What of the good he had done, every day, inch by inch, second by second? Saint Bukka, the man who knew the little things mattered to the lives of ordinary people. He had been like a father to her, as Edra, and to Uhtred she had often heard him say so to Finan, when they thought they were alone. She should write back to Bika, Osrith thought, as she held Edra, his daughter, in her arms. But what to tell him when he did not know his daughter lived? Nearly 5 years old as she was, and every month, every year, it was more and more difficult to know what to say. She should travel with Edra, she should show him his daughter, her life born from Thyra's death. But Osrith was afraid, she was a coward. Telling Bika she lived with Constantine in Alba caring for his daughter, it would take a day, if not less, for Uhtred to find out. And she did not want Uhtred to know her for, by now, after her foolish telling of it to Finan, he was bound to know. August 904. The opportunity came when August brought victory to Constantine. He had refused her to fight with the army against the Norse at Stratcairn, though she accompanied him, with Edra. The battle was bitter, and many Picts and Gaels fell to the Norse. However, many more Norse fell, as did their leader Ivar Ivarsson, causing the Norse to leave Alba. But, Osrith's fears came true. Despite her wishing that the facts did not speak for themselves, Uhtred bargained for land with Constantine, who travelled down to the Roman wall, deep into Northumbria. Taking Sellark as an agreed hostage again, the prince would be fed and educated as long as Constantine did not make war to reclaim Northumbria to the wall. Uhtred then sided with Ivarsson, and had to retreat. Osrith had feared for Sellark, but Constantine told Osrith he was safe. While Uhtred plotted to reclaim Ecgfrith's lost lands to Dunedin, Constantine also had land ambitions, and if he could expand Pictland to beyond the Roman wall then he would so. Domhnall, who had also fought the battle at Stratcairn next to his cousin, had also told her of Doncharda's treachery against Flansinna, who had sacked Kells as part of an agreement with the Allied. 15 years after leaving Irian, this was the first time Osrith had seen him look pained for his homeland. She liked Domhnall, and Osrith often told herself that she could have married him and been an exiled princess, despite their disastrous start. Had she done so in Doia, Osrith knew, Domhnall and Constantine would still have found out about the ransom her uncle offered in any case. Osrith always checked herself by this and knew Domhnall would have annulled their marriage and handed her over to Elfric. Orkjutton. Which is why she had run. Domhnall was another prince who had never forgiven her for leaving so suddenly. Yet, he had taken her in his arms and had refused to leave her bedside on the day of the eclipse, not until she had awoken and Muir had assessed her abuse at the hands of the Allied, and her drowning under the dying sun. He had insisted on royal quarters for her, and when Flann had refused, had her taken to his own before petitioning both Domhnall and Doncharda to claim apology from King Cineal for the wrong his sons had done her and dissolve the betrothal of Gormlaith to his younger son. If anyone embodied the Christian virtues of humility and justice it was Domhnall mac Dúin Níl. Doncharda tried to tell Flann of the Allied, he told Osrith sadly one night. But his father would have none of it. He trusted Cineal mac Conchobar too much, and the northern Dúin Níl knew how it would end. Even Doncharda in the end. At least Gormlaith is happy now. Gormlaith, Domhnall smiled, passing over a stone beaker of Ueschbetha. The spirit warmed Osrith's chest, and she closed her eyes momentarily in the warmth of the room. Married to Níl Glundubh now, he mused. Little Níl, Domhnall's young brother, now 29, with the implacable fairness of his line. Gormlaith, sorry and maltreated princess, was now his wife, having been abandoned by not only the younger Allied prince, who had himself eventually been sold into slavery for the shame of taking a mistress by 9 fingers, his brother, a mistress set up by the Dúin Níl, but also returned to Flansinna having been barren in her marriage to the King of Munster. Osrith often wondered how the little boys had grown up in their palace at Doir after she's left, and wondered, at a fancy, whether Gormlaith, older than her third husband by nearly 10 years, spent her time washing the mud put of the knees of his breeches. We may not have liked it, but Flann and Cineal's starvation war worked, Domhnall continued. The Norse could not fight back, few new Norse would settle in Hoslile land, and now, with Constantine's success, they will not stop in Alba. Wessex, Osric answered Domhnall's next question before he asked it, or the west coast of Northumberland, Cumbraland, or Mercia. Canute will welcome them in York as exiles. Then there will be war in England soon, Domhnall said. I will coordinate Constantine's fleet, or army, whichever he chooses. And, before that war, Osric decided, she must take Edra to see her father. 88,888,888. September 904. You don't like the water? There was concern on Edra's tiny features. Osric turned away from the glass-like strait between Dunnottar and Chaldees. I like it well enough, she replied, trying not to catch Sainid's eye. A month after her first conversation with Edruin was now heading out of the Blackwater Dee and into the North Sea. They would be passing Lindisfarne and Bebbanburg, at a distance far enough away that her uncle's army would not intercept them and demand a fee. But, there was a lot of water between Lindisfarne and Sent, around which they must sail to get to Hampton, then up towards Winchester, and plenty of opportunity for attack by anyone. And Osric was not about to admit to anyone, not least Edra, that water, river, sea or lake, was the only thing that made her feel helpless and cowardly. What did the West Saxons know of us? Constantine had asked her, the night before she left. It was clear from his demeanor, from his expression, the tone of his voice, that he feared she would not return. To be sure, he had taken all but the barest amount of silver from her and had told her Sained would guard them. Sained was also under orders to bring them back. Osric was certain, but she had no intention of staying in Wessex, not least with Edward Rex on the throne. They know little, very few knew of me. I could have been safe in Wessex for longer, for much longer. Had I not made the mistake of telling Eutad's best friend that I was his sister, Osric added, silently. Yet, you fled, with Edra, to me? Constantine reminded her, grimly. In the throne room that evening, he was not sitting, but looking out of the window, at the late summer sun on the Dee, refusing to meet Osric's eye. To here, the only place I could consider my home. Wessex is not home. And few in the Saxon kingdoms consider you at all. Constantine turned, looking impassive. That will be their mistake. One day. When the Cymric, the Britons, remember it was the Say who invaded, long before the Norse and Danes. For now, we must contain the Norse beyond the wall, to prevent their incursions, prevent their return. Constantine turned away. Do you miss Domhnall? Osric asked suddenly. Yes, Constantine replied. We were the same, alone, exiled. Like Domhnall. Domhnall made some bitter choices to regain the throne again. You were there. Giric. Constantine returned. Osric, why did you return if you were going to go back? His eyes were full of hurt, and for once he did not try to force himself on her for comfort. Why had she? Alfred had died, yes. Thyra had run, and she had followed. She had been so close before, when she had been with Eutad carrying out a foray into Pitland. Because I do not believe you will sell me to Elfric now, Osric replied. I am no longer worth anything to him. And, because she missed the north. She could stand no longer in a place of ritual, so far removed from Cuthbert's faith, so driven on schedule that there was no place for an individual to directly challenge themselves on God's might. Her choice had come when Osric had been her choice. Remove yet another germ from her body. No, not a germ. This was a child, and she had screamed to the air when the Cymracela had pulled out the unwanted life this time. She had grown gravely ill, she had lost a deal of blood. Finan had nursed her through, dear Finan, who knew why she suffered, what she had done, and could not wholly trust it was not his own. She had failed to return to Edward's side, and broken her oath as his warrior. Although, now Edward was no longer the Etheling. He was the king. He would have had no more use for her anyway. But, more than that, she had truly known her brother, his divided loyalty, his bravery, the love his men showed him. He had shown he could not serve Alfred on the king's terms, but he did, and felt the king owed him more for his service. He had taken the detestable Ethelfled as his lover, yet sworn to Edward as Rex. The more she knew of Eutad, the more she despised him. The brother she had dreamed of all those years ago, standing before Bibbenberg's gates, Sir Brut's head clasped in his hand, never had been. He was a myth, a story. He was just a dream. Your will was to be with your brother, Constantine conceded, though Osroth noted now, as salt water from the North Sea whipped her face, he had never denied she had been part of a bargain with Elfric. I have met Uhtred, I admire him, Constantine had said. I do not. But that was not entirely true. She did respect all he had achieved, but as a person? No. He was not what a brother would be. She had never felt more at home than in the company of the Royal Gales, the House of Alpin. She had stood between Finan and Uhtred on Constantine's meeting with Ragnar Ragnarsson, south of Dunedin all those years ago, seeing Mary's clever eyes in Sellark, who so resembled his father. Would she have run to his side? Would have stood by him if Ragnar had attacked ... if Uhtred and Finan had attacked? He was, even now as a man, the stubborn, demanding boy she knew. Those characteristics had matured into strategic cunning and forthright leadership. Yet she bought Edra's comfortable life, and Constantine ever treated her as the servant she had always been to him, a thing to be used at his will. And it had been to him, at the risk of her own life, that she had run, for the same reason she had run from Dunnottar and her life in the court of Domhnall. She had been afraid. Not afraid in the same way as she had been when she realized King Domhnall knew her identity, and had been terrified he would trade her back to Elfric. No, this was worse terror. In short, she was ashamed he was her brother, that he had taken up with Ethelflaed, had Wessex and Mercian interests when he should have his eye only on Bibbenberg. Once she had admitted she was his sister to Finan. In a moment of weakness, he would undoubtedly have told his Edward who she was to him. She hated him, hated what he was. Not a noble, loyal Saxon lord, to whom she could run, confide, offer loyalty and strength to regain their home that he so badly desired. Instead, his slave life in the house of Ragnar the Fearless, their father's killer, had shaped him into the man, a man whose loyalties were so deeply divided neither Danes nor Saxons could anticipate his loyalties, neither, Osrith suspected, could her brother himself. He had married for love into the kin of Ivar the Boneless, yet this served a purpose of striking at Elfric, their uncle. Yet, his Saxon ties had bound him to Alfred and his family, tighter ever than to Bibbenberg. She had run because she despised the man he was, and did not care whether he lived or died. Any information she had Constantine could have to further his claim to Northumbria and up to the Roman wall, or further into Northumbria, she didn't care. Besides, she was valueless to Elfric now. Osrith Lackland would cut her links Uhtred of Bibbenberg. He was no longer her brother. He was now, with the agreement she had made with Constantine to spy against Wessex, her enemy. And it would begin, when she returned, just south of Strathclyde. It would begin in Cumbraland, with King Guthred. For Constantine had told her so. King Guthred held the key to the lands in the south, and Osrith, she was the lock into which the King of Cumbraland would fit.